got a bidet! Hey everybody, and welcome back for another video. In today's Shoot the Sheev podcast, we are talking about our favorite Star Wars video games. What we'll probably do is we'll talk a little bit about Star Wars video games in general. I'll definitely be talking about my first memory with Star Wars video games. And we'll get into Sarah's favorite, and then we'll talk about it. We'll talk about my favorite, talk about that, and then some honorable mentions at the end, because there is not just one singular awesome Star Wars video game. There's a lot. It was actually kind of hard to pick what was our favorite. So, yeah, this beginning here, talking about Star Wars games in general. Star Wars games have been around for quite a while. They're older than me. So, they've definitely started, I want to say at least the 80s. I don't remember when the Nintendo game came out, because they were on the original Nintendo. And then there were some arcade games that came out. One that's really, really cool. Actually, it was for Atari. That's what it was. There was a game where you were in a cockpit, and you got to have like a hand controller, kind of like Luke's, and you fly through the Death Star, and it was very, very interesting to play, just because of the way that the graphics were. And, it looked like you were playing the Death Star trench on an AutoCAD drawing, so to speak. I did have the ability to play that, fortunately for myself. I don't remember how long ago. I probably want to say at least a decade ago. It was whenever the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 came out. My parents took my sister and I to the Science and Industry Museum in Chicago, and they happened to have on the special exhibit the history of video games, and they had the Star Wars game there of the Death Star attack run for Atari, but you were in an actual cockpit. It wasn't just, a joystick and a button, so to speak. So that was kind of a cool experience. There's been a wide variety of arcade games. I know my favorite is I want to say it's just called Star Wars Trilogy Arcade or Star Wars Arcade, where you go through the 3 original films and do a handful of things. And there's some cool bonus rounds where you fight Vader and Boba Fett. That's one of my favorites. There's pinball machines, which are a lot of fun. I still remember the first Star Wars pinball machine I ever played. It was at Zap Zone, and it was Star Wars Episode 1 pinball. And it was a little bit more involved than any pinball machine I've ever played before, because there is a screen in the back where you had to hit different parts of the back of the machine, and it would like destroy droids on screen and stuff. So you kind of played through the movie if you're able to hit the back of the machine. So stuff like that's really, really cool. Did you play any of the arcade machines?
I'm sure I've played Star Wars Pinball before, but I don't really recall playing any of the other ones that you mentioned.
I say there's tons and tons of different pinballs too. I remember one of the places where my grandparents lived, there was a bar, and that bar had a Star Wars original trilogy pinball machine. I never played it at the time when I could. I don't believe I was tall enough to see over the pinball machine. So it really wasn't for me at the time, but cool stuff. Let's see. Obviously, LucasArts was very, very successful throughout the years. Unfortunately, it did come to an end at one point. I think it's when Disney took over, so shame on Disney. When Disney took over Star Wars, they shut down LucasArts as a gaming company, and then did a little bit of their own video games with like Disney Interactive, but then they shut that down too. And it was very unfortunate, especially the way it went down. Disney publicly said, we haven't really ever made good video games. And that was a big lie. And it was a slap to the face to the creators of their games. Where we're kind of at now, well, now they kind of like rebranded their games. They did at one point, they did have an exclusive license to EA. And, we all know what happened with that. It's unfortunate the way it went down. They had a 10-year license and they made, I don't know, 5 or 6 games. So not very many when they probably should have had at least one per year. Oh, and we also had the, at least I would call historical shift from the gamers is when EA tried to put microtransactions in the Star Wars games, and the Star Wars community actually fought back hard enough where they did not put them back in for that game or any future games. So that are paid anyways. Because if you play the Star Wars game Galaxy of Heroes, yeah, there's microtransactions in that. But again, that game is free. So, pick your poison on that. So Star Wars fans did make history with EA, telling them not to do that. But unfortunately for EA, they weren't able to, at least in my opinion, satisfy Disney to the point where they could, extend that exclusive license. I'm sure that license was expensive, and at least based on what EA put out, I doubt they made their money back. And now we're at a very good point in Star Wars gaming again, because everybody can license Star Wars for their games. We have a lot of games in development that at least I'm looking forward to. This year alone, we got Jedi Survivor coming out. I think there's rumor about Hunters releasing this year. There's a question mark on that because I think it was supposed to come out last year and they pushed it back. So it's kind of unknown when that's going to come out. And then I don't know how much the rumor is true, but there's some rumor that Ubisoft might be having their game coming out either this year or next year too, and it's supposed to be a very big game. So I'm excited to see what comes out of that. So that's kind of a very, very small rundown of where Star Wars games have been and where they're going. There's a lot of stuff in between as well. Those were probably some of the golden years of Star Wars video games. Some big names to mention would be Knights of the Old Republic, TIE Fighter and X-Wing. A lot of people love those games for the PC. Never really was for me. There was a Star Wars Monopoly game on the computer. That one was really cool. I remember playing that as a kid. I think it's if you bought, well, no, it was a separate game. There, you could buy it for the PC. It was a disc that you could load up on your computer. I enjoyed that. It mimicked, I believe, an original trilogy, like actual board game at one point. There may have been a time where they were releasing them together. I have no idea. I can't remember. I never bought it for myself. I just borrowed it from a family member. But cool game. Let's see. Just thinking about all the other Star Wars games that came out. It had its run with Nintendo quite a bit. Some of my favorites with my first introduction to Star Wars games were the Super Star Wars games. And you may be wondering, why am I calling it a Super Star Wars game? Well, that's literally what their names were. It was Super Star Wars, Super Empire Strikes Back, and Super Return of the Jedi. Why? Because they were released on the Super Nintendo. So they just threw Super in front of it. And these games came out around the time when the special editions came out. I will say, these are some of my favorite Star Wars games. They're not the favorite, but
You would say they were super.
they were super. I was only able to beat one of them. I was only able to beat Return of the Jedi. It was a glorious feeling to know that I could beat that one. Couple reasons. Return of the Jedi, they had a password system, so even though you can't save, you could still write down the password, like back in the day when video games had that. You could write down the password of where you left off, type it in, and then you'd be able to boot right back up. It was also really cool because you could choose between different heroes to play from. I know you could play different heroes in the two other ones, but I don't think you could choose per se in the different levels. So that was kind of a cool mix. Um, in Super Star Wars being A New Hope, there was no password system. So it was once you start playing, you either do the debug mode, which is basically hacking the game so that you can get to where you want to be, or you play it all in one run through. So pick your poison on that one. It was kind of tough. I don't think I made it past Tatooine, which is not very far in that game, maybe a third of it. Um, so that kind of tells you how good I was at that game. Empire Strikes Back is known to be one of the hardest games for the Super Nintendo. That's not just me saying it, that is a thing. So if you've beaten that game with like no cheats or anything, kudos to you. Um, I've only gotten to Dagobah on my own without having to, password skip all over the place. But those are very cool games. I was hoping that there would be more Star Wars games for the Super Nintendo, but at least we got the trilogy set there. Uh, and then the next one that Nintendo followed up, because those were exclusives, the next one that they followed up on was Shadows of the Empire, and that was a huge um, game for Star Wars as well, because it was literally everything except for a movie. You had the books, you had the soundtrack, you had a video game, you had action figures, you had everything except for a movie. And it's kind of mind-boggling that they never did make a movie. Um, very cool game that I think it debuted with the N64. Definitely recommend it. I know Limited Run Games did a run with it not too long ago, but I think it's on PC and N64.
I was actually just going to ask you what games that you've been mentioning have been remastered, if any.
Well, so Super Star Wars was re-released. It wasn't remastered, so to speak, because you can play it on PS4. Um, and you can do a save system with this one, so that's kind of a nice little touch. Um, what other the ones that I've mentioned, I name dropped Knights of the Old Republic. That you can now play on the Nintendo Switch as well as the computer.
And it
Uh,
doesn't have to be just ones you mentioned, just in general.
yeah, there's a whole bunch. Star Wars Racer and Racer Revenge, so the two pod racing games, those have been brought back to life, so to speak. Um, Bounty Hunter with Jango Fett, that was re-released on PS4, and I want to say, don't quote me on Switch. Um, I know that one's been re-released. Xbox has had way more love than Nintendo and PlayStation in these regards, just because that they were able to bring backwards compatibility to their original system and bring that all forward. So kudos to Xbox for that. So you can get, Battlefront, Knights of the Old Republic, Republic Commando, Force Unleashed, all those cool games you can still play on the Xbox right now from the digital store. And I want to say you can even put the disc into your Xbox. So if there's one thing that Xbox has better than the other ones, it's that. Um, see, I think there's at least one or two more, but there's been a lot from Limited Run lately, and especially Nintendo. I feel like they're the ones that are pushing for this stuff to happen because it seems like all the newer ones lately go to the Nintendo Switch first, and then they come over to um, PlayStation if they're not already on Xbox. Um, but yeah, that's a bunch of Star Wars video game information of like where we've been, where we are now, what kind of happened in the middle of the golden years. There's a couple of games that I'm specifically not talking about just because we're going to be talking about them pretty soon. So as soon as we come back, we're going to get into it with Sarah's favorite Star Wars game. So we'll see you in a bit. Have you seen The Mandalorian? Do you wonder what Operation Cinder was that they mentioned in this show? Well, we got you covered because we have an entire playlist dedicated to the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign, which highlights Operation Cinder. So if you check out our playlist, you'll be able to see what actually happened with Operation Cinder and know what they're talking about with the show. Now back to ours. Okay, we are back. And as promised, it is Sarah's turn to tell us, what is her favorite Star Wars video game, and also maybe a little bit of, your experience with different Star Wars games.
Yeah, so I don't have nearly as much video game knowledge or experience as Jeremy does. I grew up more so as a watcher than a player, where my dad and my brother played a lot of video games, and I was really just kind of watching in the background. And I still enjoy watching video games today, but a couple of the ones that I did play, and that I remember playing would be Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, I believe. I played them so long ago on the PlayStation 2 that I don't really remember the difference between the two of them, but those two games hold a special place in my heart, and I'll kind of dive more into that in a second. But the other one that I really remember playing is going to be Lego Star Wars. Now, that's about as specific as I can get with that one, because I'm pretty sure Jeremy and I have played multiple different ones, and I don't really remember all the differences between them. I just know that they're fun. If you're not familiar with that game, and I'll go back to Battlefront in a minute, but if you're not familiar with Lego Star Wars, or maybe you're not familiar with the Lego games in general, you are basically a Lego minifigure in the Star Wars world, right? So you could be Luke Skywalker, or depending on which game you're playing, you could be Padme, you could be Anakin, you can be C-3PO and R2-D2. There's really almost no limit to what character you can be. You unlock different characters as you go throughout the game. You play out scenes from the movie. So they have an actual storyline for you to follow. And then you can go back later and collect little collectibles, or little kit pieces to be able to unlock different things. You can earn money so you can buy more characters to play as. It's a very, I'm going to call it cute game, just because you're obviously playing through Star Wars, so there's blaster fire and lightsaber wars and stuff like that, or battles, excuse me. But it's Lego, so it's kind of a cute game. It's not all blood and gore and stuff like that. So again, I don't really know which ones I've played and haven't played. I just know I really like playing those ones. If Jeremy ever wants to play a Lego game, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Just because they're fun.
Rest in peace, previous memories. Because we've definitely played The Force Awakens, and we've even done it on this channel for the Lego The Force Awakens, and we've done the Skywalker Saga for the new ones.
I know we've played them. I just don't remember what the game names are of the ones that we have and have not played. Because how many Lego games do you think there are for Star Wars specifically?
Well, there's 1, 2, 3, like literally numbers 1, 2, and 3. And then there's the Complete Saga, and there's the Force Awakens, and then the Skywalker Saga. So I want to say around 6.
That was 6 that you just listed there. Yeah.
There's obviously some variations with different platforms. So what I mean by that is, like, if you played the original Lego Star Wars on the Game Boy Advance as opposed to a console, there's some differences, and there's some very, very notable differences. We'll have to check that out sometime on the channel. I don't think we've done that yet.
I do vaguely remember, now that we're talking about it, playing it, I believe, on the PlayStation 2 before, because I remember you kind of go back to like a bar or a cantina in between levels, and so that you can, huh?
The original one that was the prequels, you would go back and forth between Dexter's Diner, and then the second one, which was the original trilogy, you would go in the cantina bar.
I want to say I went in Dexter's Diner, but I thought it was the original movie. See, my memory's a little hazy on all this, but I do remember playing. And I remember it being fun. So if you're looking for a fun game, especially to play with kids, it's great for kids and adults both. Um, you get to go and destroy stuff and play out the scenes of the movies.
They're a good feel good game. Like
Yeah.
there's certain games that I play that are just, you know, to sit down, feel good, not have to use too much of your brain, and just feel minorly accomplished when you beat it.
Yeah. Not to say that I've never died in this game. I'm sure I have probably many,
Oh
many
yeah.
times. But, it's not painstakingly difficult. So yeah, so those are pretty cool. Now going back to Battlefront. So when I talk about Battlefront, I'm talking about the original that was on PlayStation 2 and whatever other consoles, but I played it on PlayStation 2. We were a PlayStation family when I was a kid. I had a Game Boy at one point, a Game Boy Advance, and I think a Game Boy Advance SP or a Game Boy Color or something like that. But I didn't have any Star Wars games for those. I played other non-licensed games for the most part, just because of that's what I had. Um, but Battlefront, I always thought that was pretty cool. We had our PlayStation 2 downstairs in our basement, and so that was kind of like I'd go downstairs and then get to go and play my game and kind of just be on my own in my own little world. And um, I don't remember the plot a whole lot in terms of it being aligned with the movies, but I do remember some of the things. Like there's like a capture the flag type mode. Um,
Conquest.
yeah, and then there's like a team deathmatch type mode. Is there a different name for that one?
No, I remember Battlefront being pretty strictly the capture the command post type game. Um, I know you mentioned before you didn't remember what the differences were between the two.
Yeah.
Um, some of the main differences, the first game, the storyline was basically that you got to experience what it was like to be a clone and then in the Clone Wars and then transition to the Galactic Empire and do stuff for the Empire. Whereas and also it was strictly like run and gun and then some flying involved. Planet, I don't know if you call it planet side, but like you never were in space. It was always within that little realm of whatever the map was. Whereas Battlefront 2, they added the ability to play as heroes, so you could be a Jedi. There were Jedi in the first game, but you could not play as them. They were NPCs that would run around and chop people up. Whereas they're playable in the second game, and also there were space battles in the second game, so you could actually hop in a ship, go destroy like the communications tower, the engines, the shields, whatever for the enemy's ship. You could land inside the enemy ship and take people out, or you could hop in a ship and participate in the dogfight, between fighters. So, a lot of cool additions that they made for Battlefront 2. And I believe the story for Battlefront 2 followed more of the movies as opposed to what it was like to be a clone in those times. Uh,
Based on what you're saying, I think I played more Battlefront 1 than 2, if I ever even did play 2, because not a whole lot of that sounds familiar. I'm definitely not into flying in video games. It just, I'm not very good at it, for one, and I also get motion sick for two. So if you get motion sick regularly and then you're also a bad pilot, it just makes it even worse. So I usually try to stay away from the flying games. So piloting ships and stuff like that isn't really my forte. It's not really what I find to be fun. Um, I feel like I remember the character selection screen being between different types of troopers. So that sounds a bit more familiar when you say that. So I'm thinking that I probably played more just Battlefront 1 than 2. Um, but I remember one two of the planets that I specifically remember playing on, actually I guess three, was gonna be Hoth, Bespin, and Endor. I'm pretty sure I've played on all three of those. Does that sound accurate, or am I making it up?
No, they're all on there. I remember Bespin was a huge one for me and my friends. There was a map where there's basically two maps for Bespin. There's one where you're on the like mining platforms and trying to take people out, which if you play Halo Infinite, somebody recreated that map for online, so you can actually go in there and play it. Looks really cool. Haven't done it, but you can do it. But the other one is in Cloud City, and there is a section for Cloud City where you can actually go to the carbon freezing chamber, which was really cool. But there's like the inner city underneath, and then there's this big walkway that goes up, and like you could be in that walkway and snipe down on the people below. But there were different command posts along the upper walkway or catwalk type areas. And I remember when I was playing with my buddies, literally our entire battle would be who can take the catwalk or the walkways. And by the time someone did take that over, all the troops would be dead because it would just be an all-out battle for those couple of command posts. Because if you own the command post up top, and like I said, your troops can just snipe down and take out the rest of the people. So those were crucial for the battle. And I just remember back and forth, as far as troop movement, and it was a lot of fun. That's for sure.
I don't think I really played with anybody. I'm sure I played with my dad and my brother at one, here and there kind of with the game, but I think for the most part I played that game alone.
I think, at least this day and age, we don't really have a lot of get together nights where you have a bunch of buddies come over and you play video games, so on and so forth, um, which is sad. But back when I was a kid, I mean, that was one of the games where a friend would come over almost every other day, and then we would pop it in and duke it out. There was quite often that uh, I would be playing that with friends in local um, gameplay. I know Xbox Live came out during the Xbox era, but I was so young, I didn't want to even mess with it. I never did online play with those games.
I
Uh,
lived in the middle of the fields where we had dial-up until I was a teenager. So
Same here.
there
Uh,
was no online play.
yeah, we had dial-up too for quite some time. Um, if you don't know what dial-up is, they used your phone for internet. And
That made all kinds of crazy noises.
I remember back in those days, um, basically, if there was a website that you liked or a game you liked playing on the internet, like you had to play it once per day to make sure that the loading would go faster. I don't know if that's how it worked for you, but basically for me, if I wanted to play a game, the first time I go to play it, it would take forever to load. But like the next day, when it had the little shortcut in the web bar, I would type that in, hit enter, and then click on the game, and it would boot right up
I don't
after I'd
really
done it
remember
once.
doing any online gaming with dial-up.
Oh, it was a sight to see. I think there was a website called Shockwave, and they had a whole bunch of games you could play. Um, I digress, though. That's a little off topic. Um,
If
but
I were
yeah,
to pick one of these to be my favorite, for me, gosh, it's hard to pick between the two. Um, I think I'd have to say Battlefront. It was one of the first games that I really remember playing, and I remember when they came out with the new Battlefronts that were, within the last couple of years here. I was really excited for those to come out just because it's something that I remembered from when I was a kid, and it just had that nostalgia appeal of, when just something fun to do when I was a kid, I guess.
Yeah, cool. Well, it's Battlefront 1, right? Or
Yeah.
just the series?
Because what you said about number two doesn't really sound familiar to me, I'm gonna say Battlefront 1.
Okay, well, Sarah's favorite Star Wars game was Star Wars Battlefront 1. That is the original Battlefront. Um, right after this, we'll come back with my favorite, so stick around. Have you ever wondered what Amazon coffins are and what they're full of? Well, we got you covered here on the channel. Check out our playlist of our Amazon coffin unboxings where Sarah and I open up boxes that have Amazon returns and we share with all of you what we get in each of those boxes. If you ever wanted to get into liquidation and want to know what types of things you can find, check us out. Now back to our show. Welcome back. We are here for now my favorite Star Wars game. It is incredibly hard to pick a favorite Star Wars game. And I say it that way because probably my decision is going to upset some people, and that's fine. I don't care.
You've
But
played a lot of Star Wars games.
yeah, I've definitely played a lot of Star Wars games. And there's definitely one that I think I've sunk probably hundreds and hundreds of hours into. Um, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And it had quite a bit of controversy. I will say that. I will say it is probably not ranked as one of the best Star Wars games, at least from critics. But my favorite Star Wars game is EA's Battlefront 2. Sarah can attest that I have sunk tons and tons of hours into that game. I still remember when that game came out. Well, there's a couple of things to talk about here. So I alluded to in the beginning of this video um, that there was a game where the Star Wars community had some pushback and, got rid of microtransactions. This was that game. This game started off with you could pay money to get, I forget what they called them. We're just going to call them loot crates. Maybe they were called that. I don't remember. But you would open these up and then you could get upgrades for your characters. So different attributes that you could equip for different matches and change them up based on, what you wanted to focus on. And one of the big problems was it was viewed as pay to win because, you could upgrade your character based on these different things. And also, there's lots of people that went on and did basically trial runs or testing the system, so to speak, where they would purchase like $50 worth of this stuff and see what they get and see if it was actually worth spending $50 to, spend on these loot crates. And the answer was it was not worth it. I'll even name drop Angry Joe's channel. He did a review or something on the Battlefront 2 game. And in there, he did a segment about that exactly. And then you can see what he went through. You cannot buy them anymore once the Star Wars community pushed back. They basically took down the microtransactions and completely reworked the progression system. So the game dramatically changed from release date. And then I want to say it took them 3 or 4 months to redo everything. But basically, the way it transitioned was that you would gain credits and then you could purchase the upgrades instead by using the in-game credits. Another
Where you
one of
could choose what upgrades you were buying. It wasn't just a mystery.
Yeah, you got to choose them. I think you had to like level up your characters, and once you hit like level 5 or whatever, then oh yeah, that's how it went. So when you would level up, you would get points to spend and then you could pick and choose what you want to do with it. Um, Couple of things with that though. Although it's a better system than what they had, one of the things that kind of was sucky about it was that every single person that you leveled up kind of leveled up the same way, because you would get enough points to upgrade the things that you would unlock at like level 5, and then you would have to wait a certain amount of time until you unlock the next set. Well, while you gain stuff before the next set, you'd basically be able to fully upgrade the first two. So it's kind of like you had the ability to fully upgrade the things along the way, and it never really changed for any of the different characters, if that makes sense. Um, it kind of seemed like they all had the same progression system. Nothing was really unique to the characters. But some cool stuff that happened with this game. I remember I was so into this game, and honestly, the loot crate stuff did not bother me one bit. I didn't sink money into the game, so, and I never really do for any of my games that I buy. So like when I play
Did you
MLB, huh?
did you feel that you were at a disadvantage because of that?
Nope, I didn't, which is kind of funny in my opinion. Just because uh, I was that player where I was decent enough at the game where I would get angry messages from people through PlayStation messages. Um, Not so nice people out there sometimes. Um, so yeah, I didn't feel like I was at a disadvantage. It definitely visually looked like a disadvantage for a lot of people, and I get that, but they took care of it. I know there's tons of people I've talked to in the past about the game where they still believe it's a pay to win game, and it's because they never, that once they heard about it, they closed their ears off, and then they never listened again. Like, la la la, I'm not listening. And they never paid attention to the fact that it all got fixed. And so once it was fixed, this game was probably one of the best Star Wars games during the time. Uh, Not only did they fix the progression system, but they released more heroes throughout the time span of the game. I believe it released in, I want to say 2015 was when the second one came out. Maybe 27. Oh, maybe 27. I don't know. It released somewhere around when The Last Jedi came out, because I remember like 1 month later there was a The Last Jedi uh content drop where we got Finn and Captain Phasma and a new map. So they would drop
2017.
2017. Okay, so then the first Battlefront was 2015, which that was a thing on its own. I not really much to say about that one. But yeah, so they had a lot of content drops, which were um, frequent enough to keep you invested in the game. I felt like by the time I had accumulated all of the stuff from one, it wasn't too long after that that another one was coming. So that was really cool. They would implement new modes, which I enjoyed quite a bit as well. Um, the frequent heroes coming in, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed wondering, who's going to be the next one coming. Uh, yeah, and the space combat, I enjoyed that a lot. There was space combat, there was boots on the ground combat. Uh, I enjoyed playing as the heroes. They had a whole new system than the previous Star Wars Battlefront game, which is the one that I said I don't really know what to say too much about that one. But in the first one, the EA's first version of Battlefront, their idea of getting a hero was finding a hero token randomly on the map, and then you got to be the hero. In Battlefront 2, you had to at least accumulate some points, and then you spent your points on what special troops you wanted to be, which included the heroes. I felt like that was a way more fair system to do, because if people learned where the little pop-ups were, then basically nobody else got to be a hero. Yeah, that was my favorite Star Wars game. I don't think you played the EA Battlefronts at all. It was more of a watch.
Yeah, I don't recall playing it, but I'm sure I watched you play.
I remember when it first came. So Sarah and I used to like take trips and go places during holidays, and Battlefront was so I was so into it that I took my PlayStation with me. So when we had downtime, I could play the Last Jedi season content. So that game brought me a lot of excitement. Unfortunately, they do not support it anymore as far as new content. There's a lot of content not only from prequel era, but they had original trilogy era, and obviously sequel trilogy era. They had a lot of different cosmetics for the characters that you could unlock. There was a lot of different um, milestones slash tasks, achievements that you could do throughout the game and earn more credits, and use those in-game credits to unlock more cosmetics for your different troops. So there's tons and tons of ways to unlock new stuff, and in my opinion, it was a very, very good game, and it's unfortunate that they stopped supporting it, and I don't think we're going to get another one, unfortunately. EA has had zero hint of making another one. I think they are focusing way more on the Jedi game, like Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, stuff like that, just because they've had so much success. But I do feel like if they came back out with a new Battlefront game, that they would have a banger on their hands. They would just have to figure out what to put new in the game, because they covered a lot of Star Wars content with Battlefront 2. But we'll just have to see.
There's been a lot of different Battlefront games come out throughout the year that I didn't even know about.
There was a lot of mobile ones too.
Yeah, then that might be it. But just other like I'm gonna call them one-off ones that are maybe side stories or something. I'm not sure because I never played them, but
Yeah, there was a couple on the PSP back in the day. There's a couple on the Nintendo DS, which is interesting. Which I wish those games would have come out to the console. I don't think they ever did. Maybe there's a mod or something that someone made, but I didn't play the ones for the DS or the PSP because I knew they were going to be very, very different than the console ones, and I didn't want to, have these high expectations and then just be very, very disappointed. But yeah, that is my favorite Star Wars video game. Times change throughout, as time goes on. So who knows if there's going to be a new Star Wars game that comes out that changes our minds. But those are our two favorites so far in our lives. And then we'll be right back. We're going to talk about some honorable mentions. So stay tuned. Have you ever wondered what it's like to grow up during the prequel era? Do you wonder what type of merchandise was around then? How different was it than it is now? Check out our videos on this channel where we talk about the merchandise of The Phantom Menace and the merchandise of Attack of the Clones. They are here on this channel. The Phantom Menace is my first video ever on YouTube, so there's a special place in my heart for that one, so please, if any, check that out. Now back to our show. All right, welcome back. We're here for the last segment of today's podcast. We're going to talk about some honorable mentions for Star Wars games that, although they may not be the one that we think of to be our favorite, they are definitely very, very good Star Wars games. And some of them, I'd probably even say that I really, really hope we get remasters or continuations, the ones that we deserve. I would say an honorable mention for myself would be The Force Unleashed. That was a very, very good game when it came out. It was groundbreaking for the technology that it pushed. coincidentally with like force push and all that. Funny. But just the physics and mechanics in the game kind of push the technology for the time. And I think with the way that the second game ended, we should have a continuation of it. I believe Starkiller's story isn't over, even if it's a Star Wars Legends video game. And what I mean by that is when Disney took over the Star Wars license and they bought it, they deemed everything pre-Disney as Star Wars Legends, meaning it is no longer canon. So because this falls into that category, if they made a video game about Starkiller, it would most likely be a Legends game, meaning it does not count towards the canon today, but it would basically be canon for what was before Disney. Because all the games that they make nowadays do count. So like Fallen Order or the X-Wing Squadrons game that came out, or the storyline from Battlefront 2, all those things are part of the Star Wars story now through Disney's version of Star Wars. So if they did make a Force Unleashed game, it would most likely be like, this isn't canon, but we are expanding on what was before. Sarah, do you have an honorable mention you want to say?
I feel like I kind of already did when I was talking about my favorite, that being the Lego Star Wars games. I don't think there's such a thing as too many of those. I feel like they could come out with a new one every year and I'd still be just as excited to play it as the last.
Yeah, I'm really hoping, because I would say those are a good honorable mention as well. Based off the way that the last one went, I would kind of hope that they would do almost like a Star Wars side stories, if you will. I don't know, because they did the Skywalker saga for the game, but like they didn't touch on Rogue One, they didn't touch on the Mandalorian, they didn't touch on um Book of Boba Fett. So maybe they could do Lego Star Wars The Mandalorian, and I could follow Mando in the Book of Boba Fett. That would be an interesting thing to do. And then, or maybe Lego Star Wars The Bad Batch, and we could get some following the storyline, but also maybe some extra missions that they haven't been a part of on film.
That'd
That
be
would be
awesome.
really cool. So, yeah, I'm in the same boat as far as Lego Star Wars is a very, very good Star Wars game. It definitely made a run for one of my favorite Star Wars games made. But I feel like with the way that they did the latest one, that they could do a lot of good stuff moving forward. Because they made a whole new engine. It's the newest game is not like the old ones as far as how you play it. So they got a lot of good stuff coming for them. Another good honorable mention, in my opinion, and unfortunately, once again, it's going to be something that isn't going to be made anymore, as far as we know, is the Star Wars stuff from Disney Infinity. Now, we haven't covered Disney Infinity on this channel yet. I hope to do that sometime in the future. But basically, if you don't know what Disney Infinity was, it was Disney's answer to the Toys to Life games. So, like Skylanders and Lego Dimensions and Amiibo for Nintendo. Disney Infinity was basically all these different Disney properties that they were putting into the game. So Disney Infinity 1 focused on like Disney and Pixar. Disney Infinity 2.0 focused on Marvel, and then Disney Infinity 3.0 focused on Star Wars. And so what you would do is you would buy like these collectible figures, and yes, we have every single figure there is because I was a diehard for this game. You buy these figures and you put them on a platform, and then you would be able to play as that character in the game. So they had, I think, 3 Star Wars games for that. There was one that covered prequel era type stuff. There was one that covered the original trilogy. And then we had The Force Awakens because that was the only one that came out during the time for Disney Infinity. Disney Infinity did not live long enough to become part of The Last Jedi. Uh, the original trilogy stuff, well, I guess I should back up. They loosely followed the Star Wars canon. I think that was one of their missteps, was being so loose with it, but they were creative. And what I mean by that is I remember in the original trilogy, when you got to the Battle of Hoth, uh, it was really, really cool because the way you took down ATs was you either do the tow cable or you have to go on top of the walker and take out its batteries because it's a toy. Um, all the characters acted as toys. But during that battle, Vader and Luke meet, and Vader tells Luke that he is his father on Hoth, which is completely different from the films. But I think for the sake of time and level design, uh, they decided to morph the uh, canon a little bit to fit their own video game agenda. And so you kind of like went from Hoth to episode 6. So kind of weird how that happens, but I think one of the reasons why that had to happen was Disney Infinity liked to make it so you had two characters playing at a, well, you had the option of playing as two characters at a time, you and a friend. And if you went to Dagobah, there really wasn't a way for you to, play with a friend because Luke was the only one there. So stuff
So
like
I was just looking up some launch dates just because I was curious, how innovative was this game for its time? And so at the time that this came out, of the games that you mentioned that were also the Toys to Life style, the only one that was out at that time was Skylanders. So Skylanders came out in 2011, I believe. Disney Infinity launched in 2013. Amiibos were not a thing until 2014, and then the Lego Dimensions wasn't until 2015. So other than Skylanders, this was really new for its time. And Skylanders is cool and all, but it was, it wasn't characters that you knew really. Whereas, Lego Dimensions has characters that Amiibo has characters that you know. So this was really the first game of that style with characters that you were already familiar with.
Yeah, and I still remember the first time that I ever got invested in this game. Like, I didn't know what it was, and I was looking up like crazy online of what is this game? What are these figures? And basically just decided to, dive in the deep end of the pool, and I bought the starter kit and a couple of extra characters, and the rest is history. Now we have them all. It's
It'd be fun to
very
play it again sometime.
Yeah, well, I think we're definitely gonna at least play the Star Wars stuff for the channel, so you and I can check that out. Um, I think I'm even to that. I used to be the kind of person where I'm like, I don't want my progress to reset because I've already played all of it. I feel like I'm a little beyond that at this point. Like I want to replay the game and have everything refreshed. So I think that would be cool to do. Um, even for all the games, because I remember the Pirates of the Caribbean section was a lot of fun for the original. The final thing that came out for Disney Infinity was Finding Dory. I remember that.
Because they had a new mechanic of swimming.
Yeah, they had been working on that for so long, and that ended up being the last thing that they had.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because the reason why Disney Infinity went under was when they had 2.0, they overproduced their figures and basically had a whole bunch of losses because of it. And the big thing that's unfortunate is that they finally had all of their major platforms out there. They had Disney and Pixar, they had Marvel, they had Star Wars. So when they did the next game, they could have done so much more with being able to combine them all, because the idea was that there was a mode in this game where you could actually take all of those properties and combine them. And that was actually a big thing they were going to do with the fourth one, if you've paid attention to any of their leaks from what 4.0 is supposed to be like. Yeah, so Disney Infinity, that's a big honorable mention for Star Wars video games.
Another one that I'm gonna mention, just because I remember you playing it a lot, is gonna be Fallen Order.
Yeah, Fallen Order was definitely a good game. Um, I still remember uh, it was like a week or two after the game came out. There was a new trailer from Xbox that kind of ruined the ending. They like had the big appearance at the end of the game in the trailer. So good job, Xbox. Good job on that one. But I thought Fallen Order was pretty good. There was one thing that I hope they're going to improve on for the next one, and that is fast travel.
One other one that's not necessarily an honorable mention, but something that I think we forgot to mention earlier when we were just talking about the different Star Wars games that are out there is VR.
Yeah, there are VR Star Wars games. One of them that we have, well, actually, I think we have both of the Star Wars VR games that are at least out for PlayStation. No, there's one we don't have. Um, there is Vader Immortal, which is amazing. If you haven't played that in VR, if there's one Star Wars VR game to play, that might be the one to play for you. The Squadrons game, so if you bought it and you played it like normal, I mean that's what I did. That's fine, but there's also a free VR version to play with it as well. I have not played that yet, and it's probably something I should do at this point. Um, the third game that I know that is on PSVR is Star Wars Pinball. So like you could virtually play a pinball machine. It's not really my thing to do that virtually. So
And you already have the video game of it.
yeah, I have the Switch game of the pinball machine. So I feel like the VR one would be a little aggravating because it's just you looking around trying to find the pinball and stuff and hitting the buttons. So I feel like there's a little too much going on there that could go wrong. So I trying to stay away from that one.
I think for a VR game, I'd want more to look at than just a pinball machine in front of me. Like, I want to be able to see my environment. That's kind of the point of VR.
Yeah. And really you're just kind of in your basement with a pinball machine. And there are things you can collect and put like, different Star Wars standees and props in your basement for that game. So I don't want to knock it too hard, but the game itself just not quite for me. There are other Star Wars VR games out there on the Meta, I believe, the Facebook version of VR. I think there's Tales of Batu, I think it's called. It'll be coming to PSVR 2, but that's not out yet. So, and I don't know if we're going to be getting that anywhere as close to when it comes out. Who knows? It's very expensive, very expensive. It's more money than the PlayStation 5, which is ridiculous.
And it's not backwards compatible.
No, which is also ridiculous. So Sarah and I are gonna have to think hard on that one. Just trying to think, just some rattle some Star Wars games off that I know I love. Revenge of the Sith, we played that here on the channel. That's a really good one. I feel like that had some groundbreaking lightsaber mechanics for its time. I do think Jedi's Fallen Order is probably the best currently as far as lightsaber combat. Sarah's Battlefront mentions, those are very good. The Lego Star Wars are great. We mentioned Force Unleashed, Disney Infinity. Republic Commando is pretty good. We did play that here on the channel. We will be finishing that up very soon and moving on to Fallen Order because I want to play that with you guys before we get to Survivor because we are going to be covering that on the channel. I actually have not played the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games for the PC. I know those are very big games for Star Wars fans for when those came out. I want to say it was around the 90s is when those came out. They were computer games. I have not played those extensively. I played maybe like the first 5 minutes at a time because my grandma had it and I tried playing it. I didn't know what I was doing for my age. So I never went back to playing those games. Um, Knights of the Old Republic, I have played that one. I enjoy it, but the mechanics of the combat, I really, really don't like. So I'm hoping that the new one that comes out is gonna have better battle mechanics. What were you gonna say?
Another one that I would mention is the Star Wars, I think it's called Star Wars Racer. Just because I remember you being really excited when Limited Run was coming out with those games and being able to play those games again. So, anytime you're excited to replay a game, I feel like that's a good honorable mention.
Yeah, they're very, very good. And honestly, it is just like Qui-Gon said, it takes a Jedi skill to play, pod racing. It is fast. And if you're not paying attention, you're probably going to blow up. So I really like how the developers actually made it kind of that way where you really have to be paying attention with the speeds and whatnot. I think they did a really good job with that.
Imagine if that was a VR game. I feel like I'd get so sick.
There was an arcade game of it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, maybe I should do this honorable mention. Star Wars Connect. Um, so Xbox had the Connect game stuff that come out where you're supposed to use your body for the movement. There was Star Wars Connect where there was a handful of different modes you could play. There was a story mode where you could be a Jedi and you're supposed to, block with your hands and use the Force. Um, but there was also the pod racer mode, so you had to put your hands up like this, and if you put them both forward, then you accelerated. If you put one of them forward, then you turned based on the way that your hands were. There was a Rancor Rampage mode where you're basically a Godzilla Rancor going through Tatooine and just ripping apart the city.
Sounds like fun.
Oh, and we cannot forget Star Wars Just Dance.
Is that the one of I'm Han Solo?
It's exactly what that was. Yes.
That is one of the songs you can dance to is I'm Han Solo, I'm Han Solo, I'm Han Solo.
No, not dancing to it, but that was part of that game too. I don't remember if there was a fifth one, but yeah, I remember when that came out, I was totally psyched. There was a special edition that came out of the Xbox where it was R2D2 and your controller was C3PO.
Ooh.
I almost bought it, but I just couldn't get myself to spend like $400 for that whole set. Um, Kind of
When you
regret it, but
when you were talking about arcade games earlier, did you mention the one at Dave and Buster's?
I did not. The Star Wars Battle Pod, that's called,
I think so.
where you kind of have the screen all the way around you, and then you are on rails, but to a point, it feels like you're flying in free form. Like I don't know what you call that. It feels like you're flying it, like your objective where you're supposed to be flying it makes you go in that direction, but you do have some freedom of where you're looking at least and how fast you're flying with the thruster.
Yeah, not a totally free map. One thing that's really cool about that arcade game, I think, is you say battle pod, but you got the screens all around you, like you mentioned, but you're also totally encapsulated because behind you it's obviously the back of your seat, but then there's this darkened like plexiglass, and there's even a door to be able to get in that's like a darkened plexiglass. So you're really in the zone. There's room for one, maybe two other people to be in there with you if you're able to crunch down or crouch down and get real small because it's very cramped in there. Um, but you don't have any of the outside arcade noise or like lights distracting you and stuff, so it's very immersive.
Yeah, and it's one of those games where even though I've beaten every single level, I still go there every time I go to Dave and Buster's to get my little Star Wars fix from the arcade.
Except that our local one took it out of their arcade now, and we're very sad about that.
Yeah, we're gonna boycott Dave and Buster's for that. Um, Maybe it'll come back sometime. Maybe it was down for servicing. Something tells me that people don't play it as much because the last time it was there, it was off in the corner.
Maybe I'll have to call them and see if they're willing to sell it to me.
Yeah, I have to
Imagine if you came
go.
home and you saw that in the house.
That'd be insane.
That sucker's big to be
Yeah.
able to have you be totally encapsulated with 1 to 3 people fitting in there.
Yeah. And they did update the levels a couple of times, like they added on to it. I don't think they've done anything since the Battle of Takadana, but they did update it at one point to add levels. But I think we could probably talk about video games of Star Wars forever, but we're gonna have to wrap up the podcast here. So this is today's podcast. We're talking about our favorite Star Wars video games and honorable mentions, of course. If you enjoy this type of video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn your notifications. That way you are alerted when more Shoot the Sheev podcasts are released. Drop us a like if you like this podcast and drop us a comment letting us know your favorite Star Wars video games and what cool ones you are playing now. And then as always, everybody, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.